the wrong guy.
I mean, Medicare spent about $5 million last year. Medicaid, the parity lives are 3 times what they were, a few years ago. I had seen, and it kind of runs counter to some of the topics that we talked about in terms of the repetition, that there's a fear that once you have something like this, patients will repeatedly access it even though they may not need
That
it.
is the fear.
I've heard that as a potential excuse, but I don't know if that's reality, because if you look at Kaiser actually has the opposite experience, where more is better and actually has reduced the cost curve. But I'd love to get some of your perspectives, Alan.
So Medicaid pays for it, and Medicare doesn't pay for it. So you have a disconnect there. And you're right, Medicare doesn't pay for it because they're afraid it'll just be additive care. And I don't know why those 2 big federal organizations came down differently on that. But I think the experience has been that there may be some additive care, but it's in the range of 10% of visits. So probably it's an unfounded worry, because otherwise those are the 90% save money.
I think logic and reason don't always apply.
Not with the government.
And just the regulations haven't caught up with the real world, right? And I don't think it's any different than, the interstate banking regulations of, 25 years ago that didn't catch up for a long time. And so it's something for me, and when I was making the decision to join Able to, saw that as just huge upside. Like there's no question those regulations are going to change, and both Medicare and Medicaid will fully embrace the technologies that we offer. There's no question of if, it's just when.
Not to be the guy who defends the government, but there is a bit of a, and this is totally anecdotal, but there is a bit of a wait and see approach in Medicare, because even though they're both federal agencies, Medicaid has also been, it's not been a flip the switch rollout nationwide, right? It's been a state by state approach. When we started 5 years ago, there were 6 states where Medicaid would reimburse favorably, and today there's about 27 that are favorable. Other states have laws that are, in the works or out there, but they're not usable, right? Like, so even if they flip the switch, it's like the light is too dim in the room and you can't really actually use it. So I think, Medicaid has been it's been more of an experiment style thing. It's been rolling out slowly, and there are lots of factors at play. It's politics, there's a lot of factors at play, but Medicare is watching, and from what we see, they are interested. They just they don't know if it's 10% or if it's 25%.
There you go.
I think some of it's definitional too. What is telemedicine and where is it applied? And again, I think we paint with a very broad stroke when we use that term. And is it primary care? Is it for ongoing chronic disease management? And you think about how a new device or something gets pushed into a reimbursement code, and it's usually very specific, and there's a very pointed way in which you can say, here's what it is, right? This is the new drug-eluting stent, and here's what it does, and the procedures that go around it. There isn't that standard, I think, for telemedicine, and I think the lack of that specificity makes it hard to understand what are we reimbursing for. And so I think there needs to be some additional definition, and it probably has to come from industry. It's not going to come from the government.
So to pick up the industry comment, do the EMR vendors drive this into their health record? Because I would think that if you had the buy-ins of the Epics, the Athenas, the Allscripts, bring in the behavioral health or the referral into the EMR, does that then create more of an ability to evaluate the effectiveness of behavioral health or bringing in into the EMR? And then ultimately, does population health vendors look at this as a point of reference in terms of their data? So I'd love to, Drew, maybe
sure.
check that out.
Yeah, I can start. I think there's different levels of connectivity. So there's, sending in effect a PDF into the EMR, so that when the patient comes back in to see their doctor or sees another doctor, there's a record of the visit, all the way through to, it's bi-directional dynamic flow of information. I think health systems have a lot on their plates, and so even when they say they want to move towards sort of the second part of the spectrum, that part of it, usually start with the first. There are complexities of obviously sort of affecting that kind of integration, and so even if the health system wants it, their vendor may not allow them to do those things because they're working on other things. So I think there's a sequencing and sort of a spectrum of integration. It's absolutely moving towards the fully integrated, and the doctor's working on one screen, whether it's a televisit and or an inpatient visit. But it's sort of walking down that path, as there are a whole lot of other competing priorities from a technical perspective within the health system.
It's a very long path. Last time I checked, there were like about 1,400 or more EMR vendors in the country, and I can't speak for all of them, but in the behavioral space, we know a lot of them, and they still haven't decided how they look at telemedicine. They haven't decided if this is, a technology feature that is something that eventually could be something they offer and build in, and so they view telemedicine companies as a competitive threat, or whether this is the responsibility to their customers to provide sort of interoperability here as a meaningful healthcare service that exists in the market. And each of them has a different approach, and we see all of them play out. But for the most part, at least in behavioral, EMR adoption and EMR development has lagged behind the other specialties and kind of general larger EMRs that cater to hospitals. So we see this being a very long road where interoperability truly happens, even when it exists, even when they are following standards, HL7, they're really not prepared to enable true interoperability in the way that it needs to happen for this to be a seamless experience.
So one interesting thing that's happened out there, and maybe it's a little inside baseball, is that Apple acquired Glimpse. Glimpse has a completely different approach to collecting your medical history. It scours patient portals, all of them that you have out there, including it could do the one from telemedicine vendors, and brings in digitized data that can be truly integrated into an EMR. The government has weakened the meaningful use standards, right? So you don't have to have interchange of data anymore. People have sort of giving up on that approach.
And I think that's exactly right. I was about to, say that the pace of change with these EMR vendors isn't going to keep up, and there's going to be alternatives. That's the reality. I mean, hey, you want to work with Epic? Good luck, right? I mean, there's no way they're going to do that, and unless you're on the inside. So I think the Apple acquisition is very, very telling. And the consumer, the only way that this works will be, and I think phrasing it is, does it have to be in the EMR is wrong. Does the provider have the information, and is there longitudinal data that I have access to as a consumer? It's probably not going to end up in the EMR because those things are just, they're antiquated.
Well, what's important is making sure that the telemedicine consult isn't just episodic. It does need to be integrated with the rest of an individual's medical record, and so I do think it's a necessity, and I would have to believe that either the telemedicine providers will adopt standards or the EMR providers will adopt standards, and I just can't see anything but that happening.
But you have the CCD, right? You know what the diagnosis is from the CCD.
Yeah, and that's all. And that's all consumer defined. So the part of the process, you sort of say, do I want to send this to my doctor post consult? And you can indicate yes, and the doctor today gets a fax for all intents and purposes because that's what they get. So that's what they want. So yeah, it's very antiquated. But again, it's what does the consumer want? That's really, the doctor, the physician, the health system, the payer, they all have their different opinions on this, and they all ask us to do all kinds of different things. But ultimately, we want the patient to decide what's best for them, given what their issue is.
I think that works in certain markets. Like if you're talking about a well patient here in Boston, but if you ask Michael, the patients that Allied Telehealth sees in the EDs, right? That patient doesn't have the luxury to make a choice, right? Like when that patient presents themselves, you need to have a record that is comprehensive. You need to have integration happen before the encounter happens, and all of this needs to be available. And the reality is that that's just not where things are moving fast enough. I agree with you, Michael, that one side needs to adopt the standards, but unfortunately, like if you don't have like a plug that fits in the socket, one side can't do much about it.
I think we have time for maybe one question. If not, you can always come up to the panel separately. If not, I want to say thank you very much to each panelist, and I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.